right, so I'm going to get into doing some basics of preserving. So what I want to know from everyone here, who has baked a cake before? Okay, so you are already equipped with more skills than you need to make jam. Making a cake is actually, I think, harder than making jam, definitely, and pickling and making chutneys and all that kind of stuff. All right, so who's made jam before? Great, and who has failed at making jam before? I've been making jams and pickles and marmalades and stuff for as long as I can remember, and I've burnt a number of them. Just because, you know, I walked away from the stove, maybe, or maybe this is the volume. I'm going to stuff it up at one point. I certainly burnt marmalade before, which then I just labelled sort of, you know, burnt fig marmalade or something or other, which didn't actually. No, there are no silly questions, really. There are no silly questions. A jam is really, there's jams, conserves and marmalades. There's kind of three sort of categories. Jams are when the fruit it's lost its structural integrity, basically. So it's all pureed, kind of. A conserve is when you start the jam, but then you pull out some of the whole fruit and then you put it back in at the end so it's a bit chunky. So that's generally the difference between that. And marmalades are with citrus fruit. So it's good with citrus fruits. So you see, you know, kumquat marmalade, orange, lemon, lime marmalade, those sorts of things. Okay. So who's made pickles before? Okay. And who's made chutneys and those sorts of things? Okay. Who likes eating chutneys? Right. Okay. Great. Excellent. Okay. So let's go through some of the equipment. Right. So we've got jars over here. So there's essentially, well, there's one here as well. There's three different types of jars. There's these guys with the rubber seal, and you buy them with the seals. The seals come separately, or you get one with the jar, but you get a packet as well. Okay, so that's one type. I'm a huge fan of these ones because I'm not always sure that I've got the correct seal with it. So I prefer. You want to hand that one around so we can have a look?
I think they're called Fido jars or something.
No, they're not mason jars. This is a mason jar. So a mason jar is the jar with the lid and then it's got the ring on top. All this does is helps that stay, doesn't help it stay on, helps you move it basically. I mean, this is a mason jar. So M-A-S-O-N. M-A-S-O-N. So this is really superfluous. When it's sealed, that will just be fine like that, but it's just easier when you're moving them around, that sort of stuff. So this is the other type of jar, mason jar. They're a bit hard to find in Australia, to be honest. This is what everyone uses in America. America's bad for canning. Pardon?
I don't see entrance.
I know, they're just becoming really popular now. This is the most common jar that we use in Australia. So, well, you can. I'll tell you in a second how we test for sealing. This is the other one, so you can pass that around. And then this I bought this because this is a really cheap jar. So at Kmart it was $2. Don't buy these jars, okay? Because you can tell just that the seal isn't quite right. So if you're going to do some pickling or jamming or making chutneys or whatever, just buy some good jars, or you can reuse ones that you have at home as well. You just have to make sure they're meticulously clean. Okay, so don't buy those ones. Okay, so now here's the kit. Yeah. Yeah, fine. Yeah, fine. You just have to make sure they're really clean. That's all.
Yeah. But in terms of the construction of the jar.
Oh yeah, it's fine. Yeah. People have been Pardon?
The ones that have the lids that has like a puff at the top, and it pops out and then it pops back in again.
Like that one you're holding.
Yeah, that's right.
If you get jars like that, you can totally reuse them. People have been reusing jars for time immemorial, you know. So there are a few things that you need if you're making jam. Well, okay, so you don't actually need exactly all of these, but it helps. So this is funnel for ladling straight into the jar. And you'll see why this is so awesome is because it fits straight in and you don't get stuff everywhere, okay? I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but that makes a huge difference, particularly if you're doing a whole bunch in a row. This, you can use just normal tongs, but this is good because it's a bit heat resistant. That's what you use to get the jars out of the water after you sterilise. We'll talk about sterilising in a second. And this is another way of getting jars out of water as well. You can buy these kits, you know, at a homeware store. They're not totally necessary, but they just make life a little bit easier. But you can just use tongs and stuff, and you know, and that's totally fine. This is a candy thermometer, which is also quite useful for jam. Some people think it's cheating. I kind of think it's cheating because you really want to just make lots of jam so you know when it's setting, and so you get to know the ins and outs. And jam sets at 105 degrees Celsius, so you just chuck it in when it gets to that point, and you're like, well, sure bet this is going to, you know, be nice and firm. So use that. There are a couple of different ways of. Oh, the other thing is pots. Now, would this pot be good for making jam? Small? Well, that's okay. We're going to make a small batch jam. I'm all into small batch jams. The whole idea of making a jam, and it's like, oh, I have to make 3,000 jars, and you know, you can just do one jar. It's fine. I make one jar jam all the time, and it's not a big deal. This is not a good pot for making jam because it's too thin. Okay, you need something like this. This guy, probably kill someone with that. It's really heavy. So, and any of the Le Creuset pots, all that kind of stuff, really good cast iron pots, got to be really heavy on the bottom, because otherwise you'll burn it, which I learnt the hard way, obviously, when I burnt all those marmalades many years ago, not recently. So sterilising, there's 2 steps to making jams or preserves or pickles, okay? In the States there are 3 steps, but I'll tell you the Australian version. First of all, you've just got to make your stuff, okay? So whether it's jam or chutney or whatever it is, that's the first step. The second step is then sterilising your jars, okay? In the States, they're very, very big on sterilising and making sure that no one gets sick. Food safety is a really big issue over there. So what they make you do is when you do, say, a jam like this, the third step is you have to put it into a pot of boiling water, and you have to process it, is what they say. Process it for, you know, 10 minutes. There's varying times for different types of things that you're making. That's a step that we don't usually do in Australia. I like to do it because it means that I know that I can leave it on the shelf and then 6 months later it will be fine. But you don't really have to. Like this jam that I made last night, that we're going to have some in a bit, that'll be fine on the shelf for a couple of months. I know that'll be fine. It's sealed properly. It's not a big deal. So you can choose to do that or not. It's an extra step, but it doesn't really matter either way. So they're the different ways, the Australian versus the US way of doing it. So sterilising. Who's sterilised their jar? How do people sterilise their jars? Who's done that before? Dishwasher is a great way of doing it, but you've got to make sure that it's on the hottest rinse. It's as hot as you can. Yep. And the jars and the lids. Yep.
Do that and then pop it in the oven for 10 minutes.
You don't really have to pop it in the oven. It's been in the dishwasher. It should be fine. And if you're doing it in the oven, don't put cold jars in hot oven, because what will happen? They're going to crack. Okay. So you've got to warm the oven up with the jars at the same time, and that's to about 220 degrees for about 10 minutes. They have to be nice and hot. Yeah, so all I do is chuck this guy in. Now with these, I usually put these in a separate one, and I usually tie a little piece of string around that because it just takes forever to fish them out and it's really annoying. This is the trick. So you I usually put them in a different one. So this has to process for 5 minutes. So we'll leave that and then I'll show you afterwards what it's like. And it's fairly simple. You can use the tongs to pull them out. The next thing is, how do you tell if it's done? And how do you tell if you've got the seal and it's been processed properly? Well, so who's got the jars back? Yeah. So pass that one around. That one versus that one. With those jars, you can tell, and with that small black one as well, you just press the top. So one will make a sound, one won't make a sound. And the most lovely sound of any jam maker is when you've done a whole bunch of them and they're sitting there and you can hear them go like that. They all pop, and that's when you know they're sealed correctly, and so that's going to be, they'll be fine to put on the shelf for a while. Yeah. So that's that. I mean, it's fairly simple. If it doesn't pop, you can put it into the fridge. You know, if for some reason the seal doesn't happen or the vacuum doesn't happen, just put it in the fridge and it'll last for a month, up to a month, I would say. So, yeah.
It has to be hot though when you put the lid on, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's
So
the heat that draws.
Yeah. So the trick is hot jar, hot, filling, and that when you put the lid on, that creates the seal. Yeah. So it pulls it right down, and it can take up to 5 or 6 hours depending on how big the jar is as well. So don't worry. Just leave them out overnight, and then you'll see it.
Once you've opened it and you store it in the fridge.
Yeah.
Up to a month. Yeah?
Well,
Wow.
it depends. Use your nose. That's the thing. If something doesn't smell right, don't eat it. And some of the use by dates, they're it doesn't smell right, then don't eat it. That's what I would say. Yeah.
That particularly holds for milk, I find. You can really tell when milk's gone off.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. So, are there any questions on those basics? We've done the equipment. So we've got, you need a heavy-bottomed pot. You need some tongs. You might want to use a candy thermometer if you want to, but you don't have to. We now know what it looks like when it's sealed. Any other questions? And like I said, no questions are silly questions because this is, new stuff.
Did you say you need to have the jar a bit hot?
Yeah.
Boiling.
Yeah, that's right. It needs to be hot.
You said it's set at 105 degrees.
105 degrees jam sets at. Yeah.
But there's another way to test jam.
Yeah.
Plates, aren't there? You're gonna
We'll talk through the different ways of testing jam, and that's actually the fun bit. The thing is, if your jam doesn't set, just call it syrup. It's not a big deal. No one's going to know. No one's going to know that it didn't work if you rebrand it.